Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Leonardo Garnier from Costa Rica. Dr. Garnier is Professor of Economics at the University of Costa Rica. He served as Minister for Planning and Economic Policy from 1994 to 1998, in addition to 2 terms as Minister for Education between 2006 and 2014. During that time, he advanced significant reforms of the education sector in Costa Rica, including a focus on skills like literacy, mathematics, and science, and of course, the introduction of an ethics, aesthetics, and citizenship vision of education. Dr. Garnier was the special advisor to the UN Secretary General for the Transforming Education Summit, of which we've already heard much today. And we're delighted that he was able to join us, traveling all the way from Costa Rica, from San Jose, to join us today to offer some reflections. Please, Dr. Garnier.
Thank you very much, Minister Brophy and Excellencies. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this Congress. In the context of the European Declaration of Global Education, the term is used in order to encompass a wide and ambitious understanding of education, an education that enables people to reflect critically on this complex world of ours and their place in it, that empowers people to understand, imagine, hope, and act to bring about social and climate justice, peace, solidarity, equity and equality, planetary sustainability, and international understanding. An education, finally, that promotes respect for human rights and diversity, inclusion, and a decent life for all. On a very personal note, this is a vision very close to my own experience as Minister of Education in Costa Rica, where, as just said, we use the terms ethics, aesthetics, and citizenship to summarize the direction of some of the reforms we were introducing in our educational system. Our goal was to promote an education that could form and not just inform our students in order to develop the values, the knowledge, the skills, and the will to confront the challenges of becoming decent human beings who understand their place in the world and who are capable of respecting others and not just tolerating but enjoying human diversity, and especially of becoming active agents capable of and willing to work for the betterment of society and to respond and to act in solidarity as responsible national and global citizens. An education that would prepare them to lead a full and meaningful life, to become the persons they dream to be, and to transform their world into a better one. This, as we just heard from Stefania, was very much the vision of education that emerged from the Transforming Education Summit convened by the UN Secretary General during this year and concluded a few weeks ago. It also corresponds with the vision developed by UNESCO's International Commission on the Futures of Education report, aptly titled Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education. So I feel quite comfortable here today addressing you in this Congress on global education. Of course, this is a European Congress, and the declaration you're about to adopt to global education is about global education in Europe. But since I come from a small developing country, let me speak about global education not just as a European, but as a global endeavor, since what happens in any corner of the world affects us all. The COVID pandemic hit a terrible blow to education systems all around the world. But as we strive to recover from the pandemic, it would be a mistake simply to recover the losses and go back where we were in 2019. The truth is that even before the pandemic, education was facing a global crisis, which in fact was a triple crisis. A crisis of equity, as millions were out of school. A crisis of quality, as many of those who were in school were not even learning the basics. And of course, a crisis of relevance, as many educational systems are not equipping the new generations with the values, knowledge, and skill they need to be active citizens in today's complex and rapidly changing world. In order to confront such crises, we must reimagine and transform education so that learning empowers all individuals and societies to both reshape the present and lead us to a more just, sustainable, resilient, and peaceful future. As the Secretary General's vision statement from the summit states, following the Delors report from the 90s, education must support learners in 4 key capacities. First, they must learn to learn. All learners should develop their ability to read and write, to identify, understand, and communicate clearly and effectively. They must all develop numeracy and digital and scientific knowledge and skills, but education must also instill in them the curiosity, the creativity, and the capacity for critical thinking and to nurture social and emotional skills, empathy, and kindness. This is essential for developing their capacity to deal with complexity in an increasingly uncertain world. Second, they must learn to do. As the world of work undergoes rapid and fundamental changes, so must education change in order to prepare every person for the challenges of the future, including the green, the digital, and the care economy, and offering them lifelong learning opportunities both in formal and informal education. Third, and this is a big challenge for educational systems, they must learn to live together. In a world of increasing inequality, rising tensions, fraying trust, weakened democratic culture, and a dramatic environmental crisis, education must help us to live better with each other and with nature. This has to do with ethics, equality and justice, with civic responsibility, democracy and human rights, with the respect, understanding and enjoyment of our rich human diversity, and of course it has to do with our capacity and active commitment as global citizens with the goals of confronting poverty and inequality and promoting more sustainable development. Of particular importance, and it was interesting in the summit how this was a topic of controversy, there is the unabashed respect for human rights and the pursuit of gender equality. This requires a gender-sensitive curriculum that promotes sex and affective education, addresses gender-based prejudice, norms, stereotypes, empowers and equips learners to combat violence against women and sexually diverse persons, and to ensure adequate sexual and reproductive health for all. Finally, and this is something educational systems very often forget or underestimate, students must learn to be. The deepest purpose of education lies precisely in learning how to live well, instilling in the learners the values and capacities to lead a meaningful life, to enjoy that life, and to live it fully. Education must expand every learner's potential for creativity and innovation, their capacity to enjoy and to express themselves through the arts, their awareness of history and the diversity of cultures, and their disposition for leading a healthy life, to practice physical activities, games, and sports. These challenges have to do not just with the content, but also with the method of education, with the pedagogy. I remember clearly when we were working in this ethics and aesthetics program, we were in a workshop developing the curriculum on civics education, and we were discussing about how to teach ethics. And what emerged from the discussion was a simple but at the same time powerful insight. We usually try to teach ethics through sermons, and it doesn't work. Ethics can only emerge when learners are confronted with ethical dilemmas. Dilemmas from their own lives, dilemmas they read about in the news, dilemmas about fair play in sports. Do you prefer your team to win or to be fair and lose? Or dilemmas found in artworks, like movies or plays. For example, is it right for Shylock to cut a pound of flesh from Antonio because he did not pay his debt, as in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice? Is it fair? Is it right? And here the role of the teacher is not to give the right answer to the students, to preach them what is the ethical behavior. Rather, the teacher should promote the discussion, to question their arguments, to force them to go deeper in their understanding of the ethical problem. It is through these repeated discussions about dilemmas that they learn ethics. In the end, we don't want students that do the right thing out of obedience or because of the fear of punishment or to get a prize or recognition. We want them to do the right thing because they believe that that is the right thing, because they internalize the ethical imperative and the respect for others. Ethics is not about obedience to the higher norm, person, or entity. Ethics is about our own responsible exercise of freedom in the context of a shared life. To meet these higher purposes of education, to reach what you call global education in the context of this Congress, besides the curriculum and pedagogy, we agreed at the summit that we need to transform three essential elements of our educational systems. First, schools. Education does not happen in a vacuum. If we want to solve the crisis of equity we face in education, we must transform schools into safe, healthy, inclusive, and stimulating learning places. The schools of the future, whether formal or informal, physical or virtual, must not exclude anybody. They should accept every person and make them feel welcome, cared for, protected, stimulated, and supported in their needs and according to their capacities. The school must become the space and time of human integration, of our coming together in our rich human diversity without discrimination of any kind, mockery, abuse, or aggression. Second, the teachers. To transform education, we must support teachers so that they can transform themselves. They have to become agents of change. Teachers must become knowledge producers, facilitators, guides in the comprehension of complex realities. They must be trained and empowered to transcend from passive to active, from vertical and unidirectional to collaborative. They must promote learning based on experience, inquiry, and curiosity, develop the capacity, the joy, and of course also the discipline for problem solving. They should also guide their students in their learning to care for each other, to confront and solve conflicts peacefully, and to enjoy each other in diversity. And third, we have the digital revolution. If harnessed properly, the digital revolution could be one of the most powerful tools for ensuring quality education for all and transforming the way in which teachers teach and learners learn. But if not harnessed properly, as we have seen during the pandemic, it could rather exacerbate inequalities and divide us into increasingly intolerant bubbles. The problem here is that digital learning resources are typical public goods. While they require a significant effort and a large investment, a big fixed cost to be produced, once they are produced, they can be widely used by an increasing amount of teachers and students everywhere with very little or no additional cost. If left to the market, such resources would become artificially scarce and quite expensive. That is why we must effectively transform digital teaching and learning resources into global public goods, so that their financing, design, production, and distribution is organized so as to guarantee free and open access of teachers and learners all over the world, allowing digital learning resources to effectively foster the sharing of human knowledge in an international perspective. As we say all these things, you can imagine this. This has a cost. A good education is not cheap. All this requires significant investments, and the fact is that in today's world, we are not investing enough in education. We are not investing equitably in education, neither are we investing efficiently. I know this is not the main problem when you look only at education in Europe, but believe me, a lack of education in the rest of the world has everything to do with the future of the world and with the future of Europe. I don't like to use numbers in addresses, but sometimes you need some numbers. Today, we invest roughly $5 trillion in education in the world. In average, that's about 6% of global GDP. But averages are deceiving. High-income countries account for 63% of global investment in education, but only serve 10% of the world's school-age population. Next, you have upper-middle-income countries with 29% of global education investment and 15% of the school-age population. On the other hand, we find lower-middle-income countries which, with only 8% of global investment, must educate 50% of the world's children. And in the bottom, you have low-income countries which try to educate 25% of the world's school-age population with 0.6% of global investment in education. Roughly what we are saying is that 75% of the children of the world are being educated with 8.6% of the global investment in education. And this obviously means that the amount of resources we are investing per school-age person is very unequal across the world. And this reproduces in educational inequality. Roughly by 2020, per capita spending in education was over $8,000 in high-income countries, about $1,000 in upper middle-income countries, only $300 in lower middle-income countries, and merely $50 per year in low-income countries. That's about $1 per week. And you don't have to be an expert to understand what can you do with $1 per week per person. In the low and lower middle-income countries, the challenge of educational investment can only be solved if the national effort is substantially complemented by international cooperation. In most countries, however, this investment should be financed with national resources because it makes sense to do so. Investing in education should be seen not just as a moral or a political imperative, which it is, but it should also be understood as a sensible economic investment. Now we have plenty of evidence that education pays. It has been shown that a single dollar invested in education at the primary and secondary level yields an estimated $2.50 in additional gross lifetime earnings in lower middle-income countries, and as much as $5 in lower-income countries. That's a 500% rate of return. And these are only the private returns. When you look at research which takes into account the economic impact of indirect benefits of education, we would find, for example, that every dollar spent on early childhood development interventions would yield about $13 in economic returns. But the crazy thing is that we know these things, and yet we don't do them. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on. Why is it that we don't do it? There is no fiscal space, is what the Minister of Finance would say. I know. But then, why is it that they don't pursue a progressive revamping of their tax systems that could increase the tax to GDP ratio and open more fiscal space for financing of education, if this is a sensible economic investment? If education has such a high rate of return, it should make economic sense to finance it. So, again, the question, why not? Let me put it in very simple, even simplistic terms. When a country is highly unequal and has a large supply of very cheap labor, it can find itself in a low-level equilibrium, or what more easily can be called a poverty trap. The type of investments more easily attracted by the abundance of cheap labor is that of typically unsophisticated investment, with low capital intensity, low productivity, little need for human capital, but still they can be very profitable, not because they contribute with increasing productivity, but because of the continued access to low-cost human and natural resources. With no need for an increasingly qualified labor force, there is little incentive for the economic sectors for raising taxes to finance education, which is perceived as a mere expenditure. The situation can be even more complicated when countries get entangled into the typical race to the bottom strategy, where they deregulate the labor market, the exploitation of natural resources, devalue their currencies, and grant generous and perverse tax incentives to further reduce the costs of attracting foreign investment. As many authors have argued, like Acemoglu and Robinson, in countries where these extractive or low productivity economies prevail, the institutional framework tends to be weak, and the balance of economic and political power is significantly skewed towards the upper echelons of income and wealth, which again tend to oppose the kind of progressive tax increases that would be necessary to finance universal quality education and social development in general. Education is the only way out of the poverty trap, but poverty traps curtail the capacity to invest in education, even though such an investment would make sense in terms of social and economic development in the long term. Short-term profits will not allow it. It will take vision, and more than vision, it will take a movement capable of altering the balance of power for a country to break free from these poverty traps and to embark on a virtuous cycle of sustainable development, increasing wages, increasing productivity, expanding and improving education, making sustainable use of natural resources, and strengthening political institutions. In order to achieve sustainable development, less developed countries must transform education. But in turn, in order to transform education, they must also break free from perverse poverty traps and race to the bottom strategies. This means they have to challenge and transform the current balance of power. Every country needs and deserves good education for its people, all of its people. One of the questions they asked me for coming to this meeting was whether what you call global education was a luxury for poor countries. I think that transforming education in the sense we propose at the summit or in the terms of what you call global education cannot be interpreted as a luxury for any country, including less developed or even very poor countries. Of course, our students must learn the basics, literacy and numeracy, but at the same time, they must be instilled with curiosity and with an understanding of logic and scientific thinking so that they can learn to think and to act critically, to become owners of their own lives. As any student in the high-income countries, our students must learn to live and to enjoy a full and meaningful life, and they must learn to live together, respecting human rights and human diversity. And they must develop the values, the skills, and the willingness to participate in the construction of their own future. In the end, this is about ethics, and it is about politics. It's about changing the balance of power and escaping poverty traps. It is about reverting the dynamics of increasing inequality. And yes, education, global, critical education must play a role in this transformation. Thank you.
Dear Leonardo Garnier, thanks a million for your very inspiring talk about global education and transformation and giving global education in Europe a global framework. Thank you for your messages. Thank you that you put pedagogy on learning in the middle of the reflection. And thank you very much to remember that how to link global education to development, and to reflect the role of education to leave poverty and to give a good life for everybody. So thank you very much for this framework of a global view on global learning. Thanks.